Thank you, Ulrika, for that amazing talk. What an informative wake-up call for the need to address a broken system. Despite the daunting challenges that Ulrika outlined, there's still hope that we can fix this. But would you like to know one of our biggest barriers? Solidarity. One of the beautiful things about advancing human development is that there are a lot of people working on it. One of the problems is that too often we're working in silos. Many of you are familiar with the proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. In this next session, we'll hear from 4 women driving new and creative partnerships across sectors and geographies to accelerate the progress towards the SDGs. Anna Ryott will be moderating the session. Anna is a business activist with a goal to make the world a better place through business capital and creativity. She's chair of the board of Summa Equity and on the board of UNDP's SDG steering group, among many, many other pursuits. Anna launched Heart 17 in collaboration with UNDP, a global social enterprise to accelerate the SDGs through innovative partnerships. Anna, over to you to introduce the speakers on the panel.
Hi everyone, warm welcome to this session. My name is Anna Ryott. I'm one of the founders of Heart 17, a global initiative in partnership with UNDP and global brands celebrating human creativity and innovation to spark hope and action to accelerate the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We exist to amplify the voices of business leaders, youth leaders, change makers, and of course, you all. The world is really balancing on a tipping point right now. We are facing climate change. We have COVID-19, growing inequalities, and increasing extreme poverty. And a sense of hopelessness is felt by many. And also the young generation, we can see an increase in mental illness. But on the other hand, the world is also improving. More and more people are getting access to health and food. And we see more children going to school. And amazing innovation are also solving some of the global challenges. And you know what? There is also a plan how to balance this tipping point. We have the business plan for people and planet. And that is, of course, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. That is our roadmap to a sustainable future. But how can we make sure that we really can accelerate and fill this beautiful plan? First of all, we need to work together. We need to break all the silos. We need to embrace collaborative thinking and work together, academia, politics, business, changemaker, artists, and make sure if we do that, we can also accelerate change. For me personally, partnership is the new leadership. And that is everything that this session is about. Secondly, we need to act now. It's less than 10 years left before we are into 2030. And we are also, after the pandemic, in a very bad situation. So we need to act and we need to do it together. And finally, we need to use innovation, new innovation, and our common human creativity to accelerate this change. I am therefore super proud that with me today, I have 3 amazing women, and they all have used their experience, their knowledge, and their network to accelerate change. And I can promise you that they have worked with true partnership and also a collaborative thinking to their success. First, I want to introduce Olivia Leland. She is founder and CEO of Co-Impact, and she has more than 2 decades of experience in philanthropy, government, and non-profit organizations. Co-Impact supports locally organizations working to achieve impact at scale. And we will hear more about that later. Secondly, we have Melody Hobson, and she is a superwoman. She is president and co-CEO of Ariel Investment. She was also very recently appointed as chairwoman of Starbucks. She serves on several different boards and is also a true entrepreneur, even though she works on all these different big organizations and boards. And not least, but finally, we have Stephanie Benedetto. She is also an entrepreneur at heart. She is a change maker, and she's a founder of Queen of Raw. And that is a marketplace where you can buy and sell unused textile, keeping them out of landfill and turning pollution into profit. And I think that is something that also unified all 4 of us, that we truly believe that sustainability and profit goes hand in hand. And let's talk more about that as well. So to the first question to all of you, Olivia, Melody, and Stephanie. Why do you, from your perspective, think partnership and the SDG number 17 is so crucial? And how successful have you been in meeting the objectives? I think we can start with Olivia.
Thanks so much, Anna, and it's great to be here with all of you. And I've been really looking forward to this discussion and hearing from the other panelists as well. I think what I would say on this, and in particular, part of why I'm so excited for this discussion is I think that deep collaboration is so crucial, as you started off, Anna, and yet it really isn't the norm. It's not something which we do naturally, that we go straight into, and I think what we hear over and over again, however, is that that's what's needed in order for deep change to happen. When I started Co-Impact, I spent 3 years talking to social change leaders around the world. And the thing that I kept hearing over and over again from each and every one of them was that they wanted to see the scale of impact that could happen, not by scaling their own work or by scaling their own organization, but by what comes from partnering with others. And yet what they kept saying was that the kind of support that they were receiving didn't always help align with that. That actually oftentimes really what's needed in order to see this kind of change happen is funding and support, which is long-term, that's aligned, that really helps to focus on partnerships, that puts collaboration at the center, that isn't about just saying, why are you the best? Why is what you're doing the best? But that really looks at how are you partnering with others? How do we support the kind of leadership that you talked about, Anna, which is really about partnership? And so how to do that is, I think, the key question for all of us. And I'm excited to talk about that now as part of this panel, because I think that's key. Ultimately, when we see collaboration work, it's what actually can drive enormous impact in the world. And so we need to make it the norm.
And I just wanted to, Olivia, you said that partnership is not the norm, and there's a huge gap, and they are not coming natural. Why do you think that is?
I think it's that often we actually, and I've been very focused on philanthropy and the funding landscape. And I think oftentimes what we've been very focused on is on individual organizations, individual leaders, which is enormously important. And yet when you actually talk to leaders that are doing this work, they basically will say, we know that it's not just about our own work. And so it's about how do we really take the time? And so it requires taking that kind of long-term view of what's needed. And then I think the other piece is that it's about grappling with some of the difficult things in collaboration. It's about how do you have combined vision and how do you set up values from the outset that actually really can help create that kind of alignment. And how do you think about power dynamics in society such that actually in collaborations, it's not particular voices that are being heard, but that actually part of the goal of collaboration, and we're very focused on gender equality and on intersectional gender equality in particular. And I think one of the things that we see in the support that we provide is actually how do you create the space so that you're really ensuring that you can have that you're hearing different voices and that you're actually grappling with the power dynamics as part of the funding dynamic as well.
Okay, great, thank you. And Melody, what is your perspective on partnership and why is it so crucial?
In the investment business, we understand the power of leverage and how it can work for you and how it can work against you. And when I think about the problems and the goals that have been outlined here, they're huge. I mean, this is inarguable. And the only way to really solve these huge problems in the world is to use leverage. You want to leverage these partnerships in a way that can get you to scale. And I think that's been the big issue. Lots of people have really great ideas. They just can't scale them. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the only way you can truly scale is with partnerships actually with governments. I've come to believe that over time. I majored in international relations and public policy at Princeton, and we talked a lot about how do you deal with major problems in the world just on your own. You can't. And so I think understanding that those partnerships are extraordinarily important to leveraging good ideas. I've seen that work very, very effectively. There are many examples in history of that being the case, and ultimately leading to better outcomes for our society. In the absence of that leverage, in the absence of leveraging partnerships, good ideas die on the vine.
No, I totally agree. I have the same. When I was CEO of Swedfund, the Swedish development finance institution, and realized that we had such a complex portfolio with so many issues, targeting everything from poverty to water to climate, I realized that I couldn't, as a leader, anyway, solve this myself. So what we started to do, and that was actually the first time, we started to invite, if there were human issue questions in a really difficult surrounding or investments, we invited all the civil society organization on that topic. Or if there were a question of climate or circular economy, we invited in people. And I was just so surprised that that was something new. But I totally agree that you can't do everything yourself. You really need to seek that knowledge. So Stephanie, your perspective as an entrepreneur and with all what you have done, how do you see partnership and why is it crucial in your business?
I think there has been this myth for so long that sustainability isn't scalable. And I'm really excited that we're all here together today to show you that that is not the case at all. These are both profitable and scalable businesses that can literally solve the world's water crisis when we come together. And one of the most valuable things we did as an entrepreneur and at a startup, Queen of Raw, was to develop strong collaborations and partnerships really early on. We work with the United Nations, with MIT, with SAP, with New York City government, all to make it easier for our community to adopt our innovations and to also scale their sustainable solutions. And what's cool is that when those partners in turn communicate about you, it actually builds really strong trustworthiness globally. There's this very interesting book called Transformative Markets, written by a man, Robert Lutke. And he actually ran an algorithm at Georgetown, analyzing from 2018 to the present, all these really incredible news articles and business information and social media posts that talked about businesses transforming markets. And he ranked them on a trust score. And we actually ended up being the leaders above Coca-Cola and Amazon and Google. And why I call that out is because one of the reasons that we ranked so high was because when we communicated about what we were doing, we used strong and distinct language, and we have a lot of partners and collaborators. So it actually becomes a huge value add to your business, as well as to the businesses of the biggest companies in the world. A lot of times I think people are doing good work, but they're not always talking about it. And what's very exciting is the United Nations has recently published an entire database making publicly available all this information, whether you're a company, a retailer, a manufacturer, government, non-government, a startup, and you can actually put into this database what you're working on from the SDG perspective and actually make reports on your progress in meeting those SDGs. And I think that's really powerful to see. And if you need any inspiration with what we're going through in the world right now, check that out. It's available at sustainabledevelopment.un.org/partnerships, because there you can see some of the most incredible work in the world going on, and you can all participate and be part of that and connect with each other. Because at the end of the day, the SDGs are all connected with each other, just as we're all connected with each other.
Yeah, that's so true. And they are so interconnected. And that's also a reason why the topic for us with partnership, the goal number 17, is so important. Because if we can't partner, then it will be, we want to manage to solve the problems. I was also thinking about, so I started to say that partnership is the new leadership. Has never been more important, but also the fact that we are actually running out of time. So we know that if we are going to manage to fulfill the goals, we need to act now. And do you see any other trends now after the COVID-19 pandemic that this change can accelerate? Do you see any system change, or do you see any particular question or other SDGs that actually can accelerate, or will we have a totally setback? Who want to start answering? Where are we now? Can COVID-19 accelerate change, or will we have more of a setback? And why is partnership even maybe more important now?
It may sound crazy, but I'm going to say both. So I think on the one hand, we've had some tremendous setbacks. We've seen that in terms of global poverty. We've seen it in terms of, in America, there are so many examples of how the pandemic has affected Black and Latinx communities disproportionately from a health perspective, as well as from a business perspective. Those entrepreneurs have been crushed in this environment, and the recovery will take a very, very long time, and it will be very, very hard. And people have experienced great pain. We know that all around the world. There's no denying the setbacks that have occurred. At the same time, I think that because of some of those setbacks, I think for every action, the old saying goes, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And I think there are some reactive moments going on in this country and around the world that are looking in a very, very direct and targeted way to counter those setbacks. And I think some of those things will become embedded in society in a way that could be tremendously helpful. Now, we've had some safety nets here in America to help people through the crisis that have largely been driven by our government. But I think there are a lot of nonprofits and philanthropic organizations right now that are thinking about prolonged and sustained efforts to help rehabilitate communities. And I think that will be something that there will be outcomes that will come from that will be beyond our expectations. One example also, and I've gone on too long, but just a very clear and obvious one in terms of setbacks, but also at the same time, progress and moving forward. Many have acknowledged this. I'm not a scientist or a doctor in any way, but they've acknowledged that literally the vaccination response development, all of that was unprecedented in nature in terms of the speed in which it occurred and how it happened. And the foundations of this vaccination will help cure other diseases and other issues down the road. So that's a very clear-cut example to me of a tremendous setback where we've had, in many ways, a major jump forward in science that will serve us well in the future.
I think you're totally right. And also another reflection is that before the pandemic, we saw a very, very strong focus on climate issues and environmental issues. But I can also see a sense of a more focus on the S in the ESG, environmental, social, and governance issues around businesses and companies. It's a more focus on diversity. It's a more focus on understanding that this world is actually global, and we can't just focus on what we have in our own businesses in our own country. So that is one maybe positive thing or trend later on. Olivia, you're nodding. So
yeah, I mean, I think it very much resonates in terms of both obviously the enormous setbacks, but also the fact that I think we can see that there's maybe a bit more of an openness to what you were talking about, Melody, of the kind of the focus on what does it take to do this work really at scale, and working with government systems to try to partner to see what's possible in order to build back in a way that is more just and is more equitable. And I think we're starting to see more conversations with that. We, for example, support coalitions of actors that are doing this work, working with government. And what we're seeing with them is because where they've already built strong partnerships and strong relationships from before the pandemic, now with the pandemic, there's just such an urgency to say, what can we do, not just to reach one community, but to really do this at scale? How can we work with you to do that in a way that together we can make this happen? I think we're starting to see those conversations in a way that even now, when there's clearly such urgency and urgent needs that need to be addressed, that there's starting to have some of this, what can we do over the longer term as well, to see impact at scale through these kinds of partnerships. So I think that's the one piece that we can look to for the future as well.
It's very true. And I think if anything good can come out of what's going on in the world right now, it is that these concepts of sustainability have brought into everyone's consciousness, right? I mean, the fact that we're here talking about this with you all, it just shows how important this is and how urgent it is and why the time is honestly now to do this. I think sometimes we get so scared looking at the statistics about how bad things are without realizing that, to what Melody said earlier, right, in turn, that serves as an opportunity. Because if we can rethink how we do certain things and build new kinds of business models and new technologies to address this, we literally have the power to solve these challenges. And that's something my company has leaned into a lot. We focus on fashion and textiles because they are, by some accounts, the second biggest polluter of clean water globally. But that also means that by keeping things in circulation, reusing, recycling these things, we can slow down textile production and solve the world's water crisis. And but we can't do it alone. We do it together with partnerships. And I think a big thing that ties us to our partners at our core is technology, right? Is measurement tools, collaboration tools to bring us together in the digital space quickly and easily to help us, as we've all been talking about, scale these solutions. And I think now, without getting too into technology, tools like blockchain, machine learning, AI, what they mean at the end of the day is that a lot of startups and entrepreneurs who are working in this space can help big companies have a record and a proof to the good acts that they're taking in their supply chain for people and for planet, while also doing well for a business's profit. And by leveraging those kind of tools, they can also be confident to articulate what they're doing. Here's the amount of water, the toxins, the carbon emissions, and the dollars we saved by doing X, Y, and Z. And so I'm really excited. I think the future is a massive opportunity for us to build for the planet we all want, for our kids and future generations.
Oh, I love your energy. I'm getting like, oh, it's amazing, because I think actually that's what the world needs right now. The sustainability has been so connected for the last couple of years to shame and blame. You shouldn't eat meat, you shouldn't fly, you shouldn't buy clothing. And I think really you need to turn that around. And I see exactly as you. Some of the most mind-blowing innovations are right now into sustainability. So if we can focus on what gives us hope and moves us forward on creativity and innovation, I think we will have the opportunity to accelerate change. And it's also one of the stepping stones for Heart 17 that we realized it's super difficult to fix the planet if young people doesn't feel any hope, if there are hopelessness and a sense of not belonging. So can we start by really inspiring, by showing what kind of innovations and things we can do together instead of just saying what we can't do. So super exciting. And going into a little bit now post the pandemic, can you give me, from all your concrete businesses where you are right now, any example of a really cross-collaborative initiative that you have seen, either in your investments or organizations or in your own business, that really moved the needle? And what kind of partners were included in that type of collaboration? Are we starting with who wants to start?
Well, I can start.
Yes.
So we don't know the effect yet, but we've started an initiative at Ariel called Project Black. And what we're attempting to do is scale sustainable minority businesses by bringing two things together: capital and customers. The idea was really born of a phone call to me by Jamie Dimon. I sit on the board of JP Morgan. And last summer, in the wake of the George Floyd murder, he said, "Melody, a lot of people want to help Black business." And we were brainstorming about how to do that. And I said, "I think I have an idea for you." So I came back to him with a memo in the spirit of investment banking. I gave it a pseudonym. I called it Project Black, which has stuck. And the whole idea was based upon the fact that so many times when people talk about growing Black businesses in America or outside of this country, they talk about access to capital. Access to capital becomes a constant refrain. But my co-CEO at Ariel and business partner started to explain to me years and years ago, I think people over-rotate to access to capital. He always used to say to me, access to customers is just as important. And from sitting on the board of a bank, I started to realize very quickly, if you have a fistful of receivables, JP Morgan and other banks will lend you money. So the question is how to marry that capital with customers in a sustainable way. And we thought to do that by trying to create minority business enterprises, Black and Latinx businesses of scale that will become tier 1 suppliers to Fortune 500 companies. I call it the essential workers of the vendor list. Right now, Fortune 500 companies are spending about 2% of their spend with minority business enterprises. That represents $125 billion a year. But their stated goal is to spend 10 to 15% of their spend. But the problem is what we call the scale challenge. 95% of Black and Latinx businesses in this country, in America, have less than $5 million in revenue. So there's this $1 trillion opportunity out there, but there aren't the businesses of scale to meet it. So we're trying to change that with this idea of this initiative, scaling these minority businesses. So the idea is, in a decade, could we have $6 to $10 billion Black and Latinx businesses and change the whole paradigm of people's idea of minority businesses in this country and in the world? Could we create 100,000, not just jobs, but careers for Black and Latinx individuals in this country? Whenever we grow, could we redeploy growth into underserved communities and create an economic spark in those communities? Could we have an exceptionally diverse workforce in a way that has never been done before and share equity with all those individuals so that we narrow the wealth gap? This was all born of crisis, to Olivia's point. This was all born of tragedy and us saying there must be a better way and going at it in a way that has never been done before, because we're buying businesses between $100 million and $1 billion in revenue. And typically what people think of when they think of Black and Latinx businesses, growing very small businesses. But the problem is when you're that Fortune 500 company, you don't want to do $52 million purchase orders. It would be great if you could do $100 million purchase order. And that's what we're trying to do, is create the businesses of scale that can do that.
It sounds like an amazing initiative, truly. I just, when I worked with investments in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, I heard that 2% of the world's VC capital is going to Africa only. And when you are there traveling around in a different country, you see the most amazing entrepreneurs. So 2%. So if you just can shift that capital, and particularly again, not only looking at businesses, but all the DFI and so on, really focus on finding these entrepreneurs. Olivia, do you have any thoughts and concrete examples?
So I'll share two, as one which is coming up and just I imagine will be talked about here later over the course of the next few days, but the Generation Equality Forum that's coming up, which is basically a part of the campaign that UN Women is leading around SDG 5 and really trying to bring people together to advance gender equality. So I think that's enormously exciting that this is happening in this moment when we see the tremendous need as well. And I think the World Economic Forum just revised the number, saying that it's 135 years to when we see gender parity. And that was an increase of a generation as a result of the pandemic. So I think that's one thing, is we're seeing people really coming together to drive change. And then the other thing I'll mention is something which we're developing with Co-Impact, where our model is we bring together funders to support efforts that are really about addressing systems change. So it's supporting coalitions of actors that are partnering with government and with others to drive change at scale over the long term. And we are in the process right now of talking to people as we develop a new fund that's focused on advancing gender equality, and in particular on developing pathways to leadership for women, whether it's the household or the community or the institutional level, all focused in the global south. And so we're in the process of doing that. I think some of the core things to note there, and I think some of these statistics, I mean, the ones that Melody, that you mentioned, are just mind-boggling. And I think just sometimes it's important for us to name some of these numbers. I mean, we actually saw that it's on some counts, it's 6% of funding overall goes to advancing gender equality. And then within that is 1% that goes to women-led efforts, which is just astonishing if you think about that. And so what we're trying to do is to really grow the pie to be able to support these efforts in a way that is over the long term, that puts the partners at the center and does some of the things I talked about at the beginning of really trying to support the kinds of collaborations that are needed in order to see this change, not just for one organization or for one group of people, but really is system-wide. And so it's finding those leaders and those efforts and those collaborations and trying to support them and to give them that kind of long-term funding and support and partnership to be able to see this kind of change happen over the longer term. So that's another thing that's very much in progress and that we're hopeful about.
But it's so interesting, I think, when you really put the question in the middle and then realize, okay, to be able to work with that SDG, even if it's number 5 or 6 or 7 or 14, and really put the issue in the center, and then ask yourself, okay, what are the partners needed to accelerate this goal or this issue? Then you get such a powerful group of people really wanting to work together. And I think that was the same for Heart 17. When we ask ourselves, say, we have this beautiful plan of the SDGs, and all of our big businesses have really said that they are going to accelerate and work with them. But why are they working still in silos? And when we just opened the floor and invited all of them, and together with UNDP, there was so much power in that room. And I think that is really a model to work with. Stephanie, from your perspective, do you see any, or can you give us any really concrete example on an SDG where you had used partnership to accelerate change?
Well, for us, we tie a lot of the actions that we take, among other SDGs, to SDG 6, clean water globally. And, you know, I would not be here, my company would not be where it is, if not for the Cartier Women's Initiative. We had the honor and the privilege to be a laureate last year. And aside from the opportunity now to be able to be here and literally speaking with you all, I know that without that access to, of course, some capital, but also to the financing that we discussed with them, and business models and projections and all these core kind of business startup programs that we worked on with Cartier, it was critical to getting us to close the rounds of funding that we did during COVID, and now looking to the next as we grow and scale our business. So it is an honor and a privilege to have worked with them and to continue to put forth the good work that they're doing. Because of them, we were able to save well over 1 billion gallons of water. And that's actually enough clean water for 1.4 million people to drink around the world for 3 years. And we feel like we're just getting started. So, you know, just one example where we really have seen lives affected and our business affected. Thank you to Cartier Women's Initiative. One other example, during COVID, we came together talking about cross collaboration and cross industry. We came together with New York City government, with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, with H&M, Unilever, Cisco, Goldman Sachs, and a bunch of other powerful organizations. And we formed the New York Circular City Initiative. And we produced a white paper, it's publicly available on the website at circularnyc.org, that showed how many good jobs can be created and how much money could be saved and made just by New York City going circular in the coming years. And not only giving the blueprint for what it would look like and what kind of changes in the laws we should adopt and the case studies that are out there, but it also showed what are the businesses like ours that can help businesses offset that coming legal liability. And really proud of that work as well. I think this is just to what you said earlier, Anna, this is the beginning of a tipping point of this opportunity. And we're excited to kind of drive and take that into action. Anyone who wants to join and be a part of it, please feel free to reach out through the website. We would welcome it.
It's interesting. Change go where the money flow. So if you can really show that it is profitable and you can measure and show the impact, it will be so much easier to also get new partners on board. And you have really that power number showed us what you can do. So if all of us believe that, okay, partnership is the way to go, and still Olivia started with saying that this is not the usual way of working. What are the barriers? Why isn't it happening more? Why are we still working in silos? Olivia, you brought it up in the beginning. So what are the major barriers, do you believe, right now, as you see it?
I mean, I think it's a little bit of a combination of things. First of all, I think it's challenging sometimes that if it's not the norm, it can be easy to just not go that way, right? So I think part of belief is that if we actually start to see more examples of deep collaboration and people then say, look, here's what can come of it, that will also have us start seeing much more of it. I think the other thing is that it actually takes time. It can actually, it's something that you need to take, and oftentimes we try to do projects in 1 year or 3-year stints. And actually, in order to make deep change happen and to see this kind of collaboration, often will take 5 years or 10 years. And so it's saying from the outset, we're willing to make this investment of time and effort to be able to build the trust that is needed between partners to align around the vision, and then to take that kind of a longer term view. And I think the final thing is that it does mean giving up some control. And so there's that piece of it that can be challenging. And so that comes back to, so then how do you make that work? It's by showing what's possible when you do collaborate, that can then get you hooked and saying, now I'll do this, and I'm actually happy to give up some control and maybe some of my own vision for how this works in order to create a stronger vision by coming together with others.
And Melody, you told us about your very concrete example, how you can accelerate change. Do you think, or what can you do to make sure that other big banks or investment companies will follow and take on the examples? Is it just by showing, or what should you do?
So the first thing we have to do is we have to make money. I tell people we're capitalists with capital C. So that is the table stakes, is being able to prove the investment thesis. And ultimately, I tell people we're not a social impact fund, but we are a fund that will have a tremendous amount of social impact. And that's maybe a nuanced argument, but I think it's a super important one if you want other people to follow. And so the idea is, if you can put points on the board, real points in terms of returns, then you have a lot of permission and latitude to do all these things that we all know to be so important. And so the best way to get others to follow is to succeed. And that's why I tell our team in no uncertain terms, failure is not an option.
I think you are absolutely right. I think showing that it not only give similar returns, but even better returns, and looking at all the trends with the war of talent, for example, where do people want to work, looking at customer and so on. Obviously, sustainability and SDGs are really, really here to drive profit as well. So I understand.
If I can take that one point a step further, I tell people diversity is our competitive advantage. It's one of them, because we get resumes from all over with people saying, I want to be on that train with you. And a lot of times they're women and people of color who are best in class. I tell people all the time, we are our own headhunters. We know where all the people are. You've never even heard of these people. We seek and find each other. And people seeing leaders like myself and others inside of my firm, they see there's an opportunity for me to succeed. And there's a way for me to be a leader in an organization that has demonstrated a commitment to inclusive practices. So these things become self-fulfilling prophecies, and hopefully they become a beacon for others to see the benefits of all of these criteria coming together, and how it again can drive results and ultimately affect change.
Yeah, that's so true. And it's also, I usually say that creativity is our most valuable asset, and there will be no creativity without diversity. So if you really want to be in the forefront of innovation, creativity, and drive change, then you need just to have diversity as a platform. So I totally agree. Stephanie, what do you think?
You know, I think for so long there has been this myth that sustainability, we already talked about that it isn't scalable, but it is. There's also this myth that it has to cost you more money to participate. Well, the good news is that, you know, for example, by focusing like we do on a business's waste, unused inventory, you can actually sell this today, make money, and put it back into your supply chain in your business and do other good work. You can pay your workers more. We can use more sustainable resources. You can adopt technology innovations that will help you be even more sustainable at scale. And so I think that's something really important that we shift the sustainability conversation on. Yes, at my core is people and planet, but aligned with that is profit. Because if we can get the economics right, we can get the biggest companies in the world to to adopt these solutions. And with our solution, some of our enterprise customers have already saved up to 15% of their bottom line in just 1 year, just by selling their unused inventory. And then by talking about the good work they're doing, one of our customers actually saw 3 times the conversion rate in their online direct-to-consumer business, just by talking about the good work, right? And when it's driving your bottom line and it's driving your top line while also doing good for people and planet, well, how do you say no to that? And I think that's where I'm really excited to see, especially with the largest companies in the world, changing just even a small percent of the way you do business by adopting these new business models that align that people, planet, profit, can and will have a massive impact on the world. But it takes us shifting the narrative and to what Melody was speaking about, really focusing on and articulating the economics and the value of this across the stakeholders.
So listen to you all. Before we letting in some questions from the audience, I just wanted to, so we know now that, okay, sustainability and profitability goes hand in hand. Partnership is the only way to go. We need to act now. And still, again, things are happening too slowly. So one question is, what kind of leadership is needed to be able to accelerate that change? Stephanie, you can start, and then Melody and Olivia.
You know, I think bringing about meaningful change requires the participation of all C-suites. You know, when I first started my business, oftentimes we would only talk to the sustainability departments in large corporations. And don't get me wrong, they're incredibly great and they're your brand advocates. But oftentimes they're a newly created position, may not have all the directive yet or even all the budget. But bringing about this kind of change, you need the CEOs who are setting the corporate agenda, the CMOs who are doing the marketing and the storytelling, the CIOs and COOs who are running the information, the data, the technology, right? And if you can get the CFOs who are dealing with the financial liabilities, and if you can align all of the C-suites to really stand behind and get on board with this mission, I think that is the future, and it's totally possible, and the time is now.
Melody, do you have a comment on the future leadership?
I think that's a really nuanced question. I think it's a really good one. And I think about what has worked in the past and what is needed in the future. I think in the past, a lot of corporations have been run by really, very, very smart leaders, oftentimes with a command and control style. And I think that worked for a certain time of history, corporate history. I think the new leader is going to have to lean into a participatory management and be a servant leader in order to really move corporate America, and I'm speaking specifically to America, through this next stage. This next stage is very, very different for all, I'm going to say, global companies. And the big reason for that is because there's a different level of accountability. And that accountability is very much tied to the virtual nature of our society, which is why things like the business roundtable groups like that have talked about the role and responsibility of a company being more than just profits, because they realize all of these other stakeholders, where these other stakeholders now are making sure their voices are heard. And because they can magnify their voices very, very quickly through social media and other efforts, they have a real effect on a company. So the leader of a company now must be attuned to those voices, not managing a company by committee, but certainly this idea of inclusion is really hearing people and having their perspective be something that affects decision-making, as opposed to the my way or the highway approach. I don't think there is a highway anymore. Before it was like, if you don't like it, hit the road. I think that has changed in such a dramatic way in business because of, again, these external forces that are watching. So these forces are the employees inside of the company that have no problem calling out leaders. Before they fear losing their job. Now you have people walking off of campuses in Silicon Valley when they disagree with something that is happening. Secondly, you have the stakeholders who are the investors in those companies that are being very clear, especially these days around ESG issues. And then last but not least, you have the broader community. that is weighing in on this is right or not right and calling organizations out. So as a leader now, you have to know what matters. You can't respond to everything, but you need to respond to those significant issues. You cannot brush them aside anymore. And so that's the inclusive piece. And the participative leadership or servant-based leadership is hearing and serving all of those various constituents in a very different way.
Very good, Olivia. And then we have a question here also from an entrepreneur that she feels it's very difficult to get access to the right programs. So how can you go ahead to find your way if you need or want funding? But Olivia, shortly, the leadership part.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that was said. I might frame three quick things. So on the first, I think it is, as both Stephanie and Melody were talking about, it's the focus on leadership that really is about listening and is more connected, is more about actually trying to put partnership and building these kinds of collaborations and listening at the center. So this kind of more collaborative model of leadership is so key. I think the second thing, which was also raised earlier, but here, because I think it's so key to also ensuring that we have the right kinds of leaders, is also making sure that we aren't missing out on the talent of an enormous part of the population. So really looking at questions of gender, of race, and of other factors that really have historically been huge areas of discrimination when it comes to leadership. And so I think that's the other piece, is really making sure that that's a core focus. And then the final thing, I think, is what can we do to help support those pathways to leadership, so that it's not just about the individual leader, but it's actually about what are we doing to create the enabling environment for leaders to both have those pathways and then succeed when they are in the positions of leadership too, so that we're really thoughtful about what's required there and put as much of a concerted effort as we do oftentimes on, everything else that we're talking about, but really on what does it take to build and support these kinds of pathways to leadership, because that's what's needed in terms of trying to see this of change. And I think that goes back to your beginning point, Anna, of really, it is about the leadership, and it is about, if partnership is the new leadership, what are we doing to support that, so that it becomes a system-wide question, not just an individual question.
No, and I also believe that since the world is so complex, and we talked about radical partnership, this requires very both bold leaders with a lot of courage, and also leaders that are vulnerable, because standing and saying, I don't know, I need to listen, I need to ask, I need to invite others to help me to solve these issues, that is a really, really bold leadership. So being vulnerable is, I think, one of the key elements, and then you need a support system. Then you need to be able to say that, and that is okay. So I think the question from the entrepreneur, where do I turn to get not only funding, but the right kind of funding? And that is something I hear more and more, the traditional VC or traditional capital, which is only capital. If I need also capital with knowledge, capital with a network, with other assets, where do I turn? How do I do?
This question is going to be, answer is going to be situational. I don't know where this entrepreneur is located, and there are very different answers based upon where they might exist in the world. I'm going to try to bring it down to a level that I think could be universal, maybe not. So please forgive me if I'm not being as thoughtful as one would hope. But I think that one of the things that I have found entrepreneurs often do is look outside first, instead of looking at all of the people around them. So when my business partner, John Rogers, started my company, Ariel Investments, back in 1983, we were the first Black-owned money management firm in the United States. Hard to imagine, thousands of firms out there, we were the first. Today, we're the oldest, 38 years in the business, and a lot of firms have started and gone away and not be able to be the buzzword of today, sustainable. We manage about $17 billion in assets. And every dollar was hard fought. But John did something really smart in the beginning. And it's something that I think people underappreciate. He didn't try to go to a bank or a venture capitalist or an investor for money. He actually went to people in his own community. He went to his local dentist. He went to his local doctor. He went to people and he asked them, now in this day and time, and again, this math is very different than, a developed versus an emerging market, et cetera. But he asked each of those individuals for $20,000 to invest in his company. His idea was it was significant, but it wasn't their life savings. If everything went wrong, they weren't going to go bankrupt. And so, and a lot of times I find people come and ask for money to invest and the numbers are staggering. They're starting a business. Will you give me $5 million? No, I can't do that. I thought it was interesting that he did this bite-sized effort. He's raised $500,000 that way by just going to people asking for $20,000 at a time. Now, again, I am fully appreciative everyone doesn't have that network. Maybe the math is lower based upon the community, et cetera. The second thing he did, which I think was brilliant, is he established a board. And he established a board of people that would hold him accountable for progress. And he paid them. Even though it was a little bit of money in the beginning, he paid them so they weren't volunteers and they felt compelled to show up and add value in terms of how he was trying to traverse all of the various difficulties that were occurring, being so young. He was only 24 at the time, and also being so inexperienced. He had never done this before, and having no model because no one else had ever done this before who looked like him. So leaning on that board, which I think people discount, again, in your own community, who are some of the smartest people you know? And they become evangelists for you, going out into the marketplace, telling people about what you're doing. They help you expand your message. Now, you could pay them by giving them equity, giving them a little piece, something where they feel some connection to your success. So again, the math, the opportunity, all of that can be very different, and it's situational, and it can be very much affected by where you are in the world and your network around you. But I do think sometimes when people think of big institutions first, they might just take a step back and say, who's in my own network that could help me?
Yeah, that's so true. Then you also probably will get the knowledge, the network, and people that are, as we talk about partnership, but in a smaller sense, because you get people that are really interested in what you're doing in that sense.
Sorry.
Stephanie, please.
Yeah, building on that a little bit. I mean, two of the things we did early on that really helped us get our message and our vision out there. One was to leverage accelerators. There are a lot of incredible ones now all over the world. And by participating in the right one that makes sense for you and your business based on what you need and want, they can come with funding and with access to press and partners, right? And customers, which are so important. And even that board of advisor roles, right? You can learn and get from your accelerator community. The other thing that really helped us was we applied to every competition that was out there. And there are a lot of them too, including the Cartier Women's Initiative, but there are other incredible ones globally focused on all different areas too, from, MIT Solve, and the list goes on, and I'm happy to share them after this. But what's really cool about that is by going through those competitions, and a lot of people said, why did you do so many? It takes time, it takes resources. You really start to hone your pitch and your vision and your mission. One of the most valuable things we did in our business was get our pitch down to 60 seconds, which is how long we had to pitch Ashton Kutcher live on stage. And we did it, we won. And it was one of the most valuable things we did, not just because it was awesome to have Ashton Kutcher understand our mission and our vision and get his feedback and thoughts, but also because to have that 60-second pitch, it's something I still use and take with me today. So I think you can really learn from these competitions. They too come with sometimes celebrities and press and customers and partners. So I think those are two options that maybe you as an entrepreneur have early on that can really help grow and scale your business.
If I could just build on that, Stephanie, I think that is such an important point.
Yeah.
Being able to communicate the idea, the number of people who struggle with that, they'll have a good idea. They cannot crystallize it for you in writing, which I think is super important, but also in person. And I tell people this and they think that I'm joking. Try it out on friends. Stand in front of a mirror and do the pitch over and over and over again. If something's super important to this day, I've worked at Ariel for 30 years, I will practice. I'll be in a car with strangers and I say, listen to me. What don't you understand about what I'm saying? Warren Buffett says you should be able to explain a good idea to a 6-year-old. And so the question is, I have a 7-year-old. Sometimes I use people and try even out my little 7-year-old saying, am I crisp? Because the communication skills become make or break when you get that moment. Stephanie's point is brilliant.
And I couldn't agree with you more. I actually went to an all women's school, and one of the first for 14 years. And one of the things they did was, starting early, they did give us public speaking coaching, because it doesn't come naturally to everyone. It is something you train. And so anyone out there too, I highly recommend kind of those classes. They really give you confidence, and you can have fun while also articulating your big, bold vision and mission to go change the world.
Super. We're soon wrapping up. I would ask all of you to come with one concrete, maybe two, but 2 sentence, concrete call to action. What do you want? How can we drive change and partnership?
I can start. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to get your idea out there, put your vision and your mission out there, and start building that business to change the world. You can continue to learn and iterate from your customers, your community, and those around you, and then be the last player in the market to really dominate and go solve those challenges.
I'll build on that by saying, I think oftentimes people think change comes from up high. It's a power move. They have this idea that it's an important person or a big institution, but the greatest change in our society has come from everyday people and just understanding your own power and how you can use that power for good. Power is not something that is tied to money. Power is actually tied to good ideas and how you ultimately become relentless about seeing those ideas through.
And I would say put collaboration and partnerships at the center in terms of what's possible. And then with that, be able to see what the kind of impact can be. So I think it comes back to what we talked about earlier of what do we want to see in the world, that it needs to be that kind of modeling so that then more of it happens. So I think it is about, we know the examples, we know it works, we've seen change happen across history. So really putting that as the central piece, I think is absolutely core. So with that, I think if we could all do that even a bit, it would be amazing.
And I will do a combination of all of the 3 of you. I think find what you are really passionate about and use your own creativity to work with things that matter. And when you know that, you put that question or that issue or that passion into the table and ask yourself, who do I need to work with to make this happen? It can be using that you need capital or work with organizations or just talent. But that is really, again, wrapping it up and saying what I started to say, that if we want to accelerate change, we believe, or I believe, that partnership is the new leadership. And I truly believe that sustainability and profitability goes hand in hand. And all the female entrepreneurs out there, hopefully listening to us today, you can drive that change. And I think that is truly the beauty with SDGs, that everyone can pick one SDG that is relevant for their business and to work with that and drive that change together with others. Because the engagement, the creativity out there is so big right now. So Olivia, Melody, Stephanie, thank you so much. You are really true role models to drive that change. And I hope that everybody have been listening also have get some concrete actions and inspiration from this session. So thank you again.